Could everything we know about the Titanic be wrong? Titanic. I'm sure that the moment we hear its name, almost all of us picture the same scene. A lonely, dark night, the icy waters of the ocean, and a gigantic iceberg. For years, the story we have been told has been quite simple and ordinary. The Titanic, the largest and supposedly safest ship ever built in the world at that time, struck an iceberg and within a short period of time sank to the bottom of the ocean's dark waters. But was it really that simple, or was it a much more dramatic event? What if that wasn't actually the case and the iceberg only delivered the final blow? As everyone knows, on the night of April 14, 1912, at around 11:40 p.m., the Titanic's lookouts spotted a gigantic iceberg ahead of them at the last moment. But it was already too late. The Titanic struck the iceberg and approximately 3 hours later at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, completely disappeared into the dark depths of the ocean. We all know that more than 1,500 people lost their lives. In fact, this was not just a shipwreck. It was one of the greatest blows ever dealt to humanity's faith in technology. Because this was no ordinary ship. At 269 meters long, 28 meters wide, and weighing more than 46,000 tons, it was an enormous vessel. We could even call it one of the greatest engineering marvels of its time. Some people who worked aboard the ship, which resembled an entire city, said that learning all of its corridors and sections could take weeks. Just imagine a gigantic island floating on the ocean. With its enormous funnels, decks, dining halls, luxurious cabins, and wealthy passengers, it looked from a distance like a gigantic city moving across the sea. For upper-class passengers, there was a swimming pool, a Turkish bath, exercise areas, extremely luxurious dining rooms, and dance areas. One of the most impressive parts of the ship was its grand staircase. In other words, the Titanic was one of the most important symbols of the glamour and magnificence of its era. But behind all that glamour and luxury, there were serious problems. In fact, it is said that one of those problems may have appeared before the ship even set out on its maiden voyage. Years after the disaster, some researchers investigating the accident began carefully re-examining several photographs taken before the ship left England. Some even claim that one of those photographs showed a huge dark mark on the ship's hull. Some researchers said that this mark may have been caused by a fire in one of the Titanic's coal bunkers. According to the theories, the fire had started before the ship sailed into the ocean and continued for several days. Because of this, the fire may have weakened the ship's strong metal structure. And this is exactly where the main disagreement begins. Researchers said that the Titanic struck the iceberg at this weakened point, and according to these theories, the iceberg alone could not have sunk the Titanic. In fact, the ship had sunk because its hull had been weakened by the fire. However, these ideas were never proven. What is certain is that this disaster was far too complicated and controversial to be explained by a single mistake. Because on the night of the disaster, an unbelievable series of misfortunes and acts of negligence occurred one after another. One of them was that the binoculars the lookouts were supposed to use were not with them, but locked inside a cabinet. The officer who had the key left his position shortly before the Titanic sailed into the ocean and took the keys with him without handing them over. It may sound like a small detail, but this issue has been debated for years, and no clear answer has been found. One question always remains. Why didn't the lookouts have binoculars? If they had, could the iceberg have been spotted much earlier? No one knows the answer. But do you think that was the only problem on the ship? Of course not. In fact, warnings had been received from other ships in the area about icebergs, but the ship did not reduce its speed. This was because the captain and the ship's owners wanted to cross the Atlantic Ocean very quickly and gain even greater prestige. And what about those lifeboats we saw in the movie? Were there enough lifeboats on the ship? Of course not. Even the small number of lifeboats available were lowered into the ocean before being completely filled while the ship had only just begun to sink. At first, no one could understand the scale of the disaster that was coming because they still considered this engineering marvel unsinkable. The idea that the ship could actually sink seemed like madness to them, because in their eyes it was impossible. Another remarkable issue was that a rescue drill planned for that day had not taken place. If that drill had been carried out, could the evacuation have been completed successfully without such great chaos? Unfortunately, we will never know. Now let's come to one of the most mysterious events of that night. When the disaster began, a ship called the Californian was very close to the Titanic. So why did it not come to help and intervene in time, despite the distress rockets? This question was debated for years. Some researchers said that the weather conditions that night may have seriously affected visibility. They suggested that temperature changes in the atmosphere may have caused unusual light refraction and mirage-like images over the sea, similar to those seen in deserts. Of course, this has always remained a subject of debate. Some scientists even claimed that these atmospheric conditions caused the lookouts to spot the iceberg far too late. So just think about it. A fire, binoculars that could not be accessed because they were locked away. The failure to reduce speed despite iceberg warnings. Not enough lifeboats, and even those available being lowered into the water before they were full. A neglected drill. And unusual weather conditions affecting visibility. If all of this is true, then it was not a single mistake that sent the Titanic into the darkness of the ocean. Perhaps one of history's greatest disasters occurred because all these seemingly overlooked and strange events came together. And who knows, perhaps the iceberg simply delivered the final blow. Who knows? Perhaps the Titanic's tragic fate had already been decided long before that iceberg ever appeared. Perhaps this chain of possibilities sent all these people into the cold ocean. So, what do you think? Did the Titanic sink because of an iceberg, or were these acts of negligence the real causes behind the great disaster? Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy the hidden secrets of history, new research, and mysteries that have remained unanswered for years, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because some truths never remain hidden forever, even in the darkest depths of the ocean or the farthest reaches of space.